And now is the time for question period. We are trying to stay very close to our 4 p.m. commitment for arrival. And so thanks so much for asking some great questions. We'll get to as many as we can. And so let's start with our first question. Thank you very much. And I think it starts with Victoria, and maybe it can be facilitated. So that's a live mic, I understand, and that's definitely your domain. And so it starts with my grandson, who has been using drugs since he was 15, mostly marijuana, I think, now suffers from paranoia. He's 15, living at home, but won't get help. He has been verbal and physically abusive. They live in Calgary, but don't want to kick him out, and as he will probably end up on the street. What can my daughter and husband do? They did call the police once, but don't want to charge my grandson at this point. Victoria?
It's a question that I get quite often when I speak, particularly parents and loved ones of people who just don't want to get help or aren't aware that they need it. And I think Vanessa can also speak to some of this. What the biggest thing for me, because what wasn't shown in the story, was my relationship with my parents was very estranged. We had a very acrimonious relationship for a number of years. And the thing that helped the most was just them staying in contact with me. So in some terms, that may not be difficult because the son is living with them, which is maybe very difficult, but it could be a godsend because the amount of connection was what was essential for me. Even when there was a lot of arguments and a lot of yelling, it still gave me a place that was a soft place to fall, which was what was really important. And it was really about building some awareness around what it was that I needed, even though I didn't know that I needed it at the time. And so there was a real rapport and trust-building process that had to continue to happen, which makes it really difficult for people who are loved ones, because you more or less, in some ways, are powerless over the process of someone's acceptance process. But you can create, taking the idea of roots in the ground, you can create an environment that provides the best chance for people to recognize what's going on. The difference, though, also is that this young man is 15. So to some degree, is that right, that they said 15? Is that to some degree there's, it's slightly different. When I was first diagnosed, I was already 24, 25. So my parents had no, they couldn't do anything legally in terms of even knowing what the information was. So for me, the biggest thing is just to continue to support unconditionally, but also do harm reduction when possible, because there has to be some boundaries set. I wanted to ask if any of you have sort of some practical, sort of some from the clinical side. Sure.
So one of the topics that we cover in the course is just around the stages of change, and being able to recognize and understand that we can't force somebody into treatment or into interventions. The person themselves has to be ready to accept that, and it can be very hard as a parent watching your child go through that. So similar to what Victoria said about staying the course and letting your child know that at the end of the day you're going to be there, but that you have to keep yourself safe and you have to be taking care of yourself as a caregiver at the same time. So it's walking that fine line of looking after yourself while still being a support for the person who's struggling, recognizing that it may be a long, long journey. And it is one of the hardest differences between physical help and mental health help is, you know, when I use my broken ankle example, I'm probably going to go in, I'm going to get a cast, I'm going to get a splint. The most it's going to take is probably 6 weeks and I'll be fixed. And it doesn't work that way with mental health issues. They can take years and you can cycle through them and you can relapse, and it's a long journey. And so recognizing that you need to take care of yourself as a caregiver and that you need to be there for the person.
The only thing I'd like to add is that we do have a great resource in Jill Shatford, who's our parent in residence. I know that she can direct people to different types of online resources and is very experienced in terms of how to have conversations around these types of issues with family members. So I would definitely recommend that you go up and see Jill afterwards if you have these kinds of questions in your own family.
Great. Okay, thanks so much. We'll move on to the next one, which I believe is directed, Suzanne, because you've got the mic in your hand. If you could have a magic wand and get one thing, infrastructure, funding, for example, to help mental health support in our community on the Sunshine Coast, what would that thing be?
That's a very big question. To me, it's housing. I know Lauren's making signals at me. It's really
Really big housing.
It's about people having a safe place to live. We can provide services that help people when they're housed, but when people are primarily homeless, it's really difficult to provide services and to help them. So we are trying to work with BC Housing and the Homelessness Advisory Committee to create some significant opportunities for supported housing on the coast. But yeah, housing's number one.
And I would just want to reiterate that is that one of the reasons why I was able to recover was because I had a place to live. My parents opened up their home, and it was a place that was drug-free. It was safe. I knew where my meals were coming from. And without that foundation, it would have made it completely impossible. I mean, I was on the verge. At one point, I was living in a rooming house, and it was in a okay neighborhood. It was safe, but it was sort of, I was one paycheck away from not being able to pay the rent. And if that had happened and not being able to have my parents to fall back on at that time, recovery is really, really difficult to do. So I think housing is a huge part of that.
Okay. Okay, next question actually is for Vanessa. Regarding your statistics, the McCreary testing for students grades 4 through 7 were mentioned. How do the statistics break down in terms of the sex of students? Are there significant differences? And how do gender issues get covered in your course?
The statistics that we get from the MDI don't get broken down by gender. McCreary does split them. We don't see huge differences between the two. The course covers a tiny bit on gender, just in terms of the risk factors that come with gender issues. We learn about the signs and symptoms, and we learn about the risk factors for each of the different topics. And for many of them, gender is a risk factor. So.
Okay, I'm going to combine two because I'm 358. Okay, so there's two, and I think they're actually related, perhaps maybe in resources. What's the most important thing you can do for someone suffering bipolar? And another would be, how do you approach a family member who is depressed and avoiding friends and family, who knows he needs help but cannot make the required steps?
I'll start with that. I love these questions because, to me, they're so timely, and I always think of the stats that 1 in 5 of us will be affected by mental health issues, which means indirectly the other 4 people are indirectly affected by it as well. For me, it really is about just showing that you care. And it's as simple, as uncomfortable as it can be to say, how are you doing? And the easiest way often I find is to address behavior changes. So if you know if the person normally, like you were saying, someone was isolating, that I notice you haven't been hanging out with your friends, or you haven't come to bingo like you usually do, and we really miss you. Is anything going on? Can I help you? Do you want to talk? Do you want to go for coffee? Because I really see that the recovery process and the way to help people is a long game. It's not a sort of a one conversation. It happens over and over again. And part of it really is knowing who those people were in my life that I could go to, that weren't going to judge me, that were going to be the soft place to fall. And that allowed me, when that window of opportunity came, when I was willing to sort of go, okay, I've got the courage, I don't know where to go, but I need to talk to somebody. I would step forward and I would have those few relationships that I know I could say, I need some help. I don't know what to do. Could you help me? And to me, that was the most important thing, is literally just keeping the lines of communication and honestly, love and support. It moves mountains. It really does. And it takes time, but that kind of support makes all the difference in the world. I don't know if you have.
I can't add much to that, except it's also shown in the research that the most important quality of treatment is the empathy of the person who's providing the treatment. And there's a wonderful, about half-hour video called Moments to Milestones. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it's conversations with people who have, their lives have literally changed because someone said a kind word to them when they were in one of their, their worst moment of crisis. Right. So I totally agree with what Victoria was talking about.
It's great. I was going to the exact same video. It is fabulous. And for me, the biggest thing I would say is start the conversation. Just open up and talk. We are so scared sometimes to start that conversation because we don't know where it's going to go, and are we going to say the right thing? And what we've learned from people who have gotten help is what they really wanted was somebody to start the conversation. And when nobody else is starting it, what that does is it increases that stigma and shame around, well, if they're not talking about it, then I probably shouldn't be talking about it. It's something I should be ashamed of. Open up the conversation.
And just to also know is that once you start that conversation, all you have to do is listen. You don't have to say the right thing. You don't have to have the right information. You don't have to know how or where to go. You just need to be able to be present and to hold the space while they're talking. And then just hold their hand and say, we'll find out together how to do this. And honestly, that was the biggest and most life-changing things that happened for me. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And on that, I'm actually going to wrap this up. Thank you so much for sharing with us your Sunday afternoon. And on behalf of the Sechelt Hospital Foundation, thanks so much for joining us.